After my divorce, I became homeless. Not broke, not struggling, homeless. One day I had a wife, a house, and a business. The next, I had a plastic bag full of clothes and nowhere to go. My ex-wife, Laura, made sure of that. I still remember her face when the judge ruled in her favor. The smirk, the way she leaned toward me and whispered, "No one will ever love a broke man like you." Then she walked out of the courtroom, leaving me with nothing but the echo of those words. I'm Michael Thompson, 43 years old, and until last year, I was the co-owner of a construction company in Houston. We built half the skyline you see driving downtown. But when the market crashed, so did my marriage. Laura took the house, the savings, even the dog. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the strength left to. For a while, I slept in my truck behind a diner. When the engine finally gave out, I moved to an overpass near the river. Days blurred together. I stopped checking my reflection, stopped pretending that tomorrow would be different. Then one afternoon, I was digging through a dumpster behind a grocery store, looking for something half-edible, when a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me," it said. "Are you Michael Thompson?" I turned around slowly. The man standing there looked out of place, clean-cut, tailored suit, holding a leather folder. His shoes probably cost more than I'd made that month. I didn't answer right away. He repeated it, this time with a hint of urgency. "Michael Thompson?" I nodded. He smiled slightly, like he'd just confirmed something. "My name is Reynolds. I work with a law firm in New York. I've been trying to find you for weeks." He opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Your great-uncle, Charles Thompson, passed away 3 weeks ago. You're listed as his sole heir." I blinked, sure I'd misheard him. I didn't even know I had a great-uncle. Reynolds continued, his tone calm, matter-of-fact. "He's left you his yacht, his penthouse, and an estate valued at around $50 million. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "But before you can claim any of it, there's one condition." He paused, watching me carefully. And that silence, those few seconds before he spoke again, changed everything. Reynolds glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. Then he lowered his voice. "Your uncle's will specifies that before you can inherit anything, you must spend 30 days living in his estate, under his rules." It sounded ridiculous. I'd been sleeping under bridges, and now someone was offering me a penthouse and a yacht, with a catch that sounded like a prank. "What rules?" I asked. Reynolds smiled faintly. He left them written down. "You'll understand once you're there. But I'll warn you, Mr. Thompson, your uncle was a very particular man." He handed me a card with an address in Manhattan and enough cash for a bus ticket. I took it, unsure whether to laugh or run. But that night, sitting on the curb under a flickering streetlight, I stared at that card until the ink practically burned into my eyes. I left Houston 2 days later. The bus ride took over 30 hours. I barely slept. I kept imagining what kind of man my great-uncle had been. The kind of man who could leave $50 million behind and still care about how it was spent. I tried to picture him, but the only image that came to mind was Laura's face, sneering at me through the courtroom glass. When I arrived in New York, Reynolds was waiting near the station, same suit, same calm expression. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Follow me." We drove for nearly an hour before stopping in front of a building that didn't look real. It wasn't just a penthouse. It was an entire floor of glass and marble overlooking the Hudson. A private elevator led directly to a massive living room, quiet except for the hum of the city below. Reynolds placed a small envelope on the coffee table. "Your uncle's instructions," he said. "Follow them exactly. If you leave before 30 days, the inheritance is void." When he left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but the message was clear. "Michael, money destroyed every man in our family. Before it destroys you, I want you to understand what it means to have nothing. Live in my house as I did, alone. No visitors, no calls, no contact with the outside world. If you can last 30 days, you'll be ready." I looked around the empty penthouse. No phone, no TV, no connection to anyone. For the second time in my life, I realized I was alone, but this time, surrounded by everything I thought I wanted. The first night in the penthouse didn't feel real. The place was silent, too clean, too still. Every step echoed against the marble floors. I walked from room to room like I was trespassing. The walls were lined with abstract art and old photographs of a man I barely recognized, my great-uncle, Charles Thompson. In every picture, he looked powerful but detached, like a man who'd learned to smile without warmth. The fridge was full, the bed was made, and yet, it felt emptier than any alley I'd slept in. There was something about that silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was watching. I found a journal on the nightstand. The first page had only one line written in dark ink. You don't own anything until you understand what it costs to keep it. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just another eccentric billionaire's riddle. But every day that followed, the house seemed to test me. On the third morning, the power went out. The elevators stopped working. I called down to the concierge. No answer. My phone, which I thought I'd hidden in my duffel bag, was gone. Someone had taken it. That evening, I heard faint music coming from the far end of the hall. I followed the sound to a locked door. When I pressed my ear against it, the music stopped. Then a voice whispered, low and close, "Not yet." I stumbled back, my pulse racing. I told myself it was the wind, the building settling, anything but what it sounded like. But the next morning, there was a note slipped under my door. It was written in the same handwriting as my uncle's will. "You're being watched. Don't break the rules." I tore the paper in half, but my hands were shaking. For the next few days, I did exactly what the note said. I didn't leave the penthouse. I didn't call for help. I just waited, counting the days, trying to convince myself that the mansion wasn't playing games with me. But on the seventh night, I woke to the sound of footsteps just outside my bedroom door, slow, deliberate, pacing. I waited for them to stop. They never did. That night changed everything. I didn't sleep at all. The footsteps went on for hours, fading, then returning, circling the room like whoever, or whatever. It was knew exactly how long I could take the tension before breaking. But I didn't move. I lay still, every muscle locked. When the sun finally came through the curtains, the sound stopped. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. The marble floor reflected my face back at me, pale, hollow-eyed, not the man I used to be. But near the elevator, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a small camera, embedded into the molding, pointed directly at my door. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then I reached up and covered the lens with a piece of tape. That afternoon, I found another note slipped under the door. No greeting, no explanation, just 3 words written in black ink. "Don't test me." It was signed with an initial, C. I should have left right then. Walked out, forfeited the inheritance, and gone back to sleeping in my car. But something in me refused. Maybe pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe I'd already lost too much to walk away again. I decided to search the penthouse from top to bottom. There were no hidden doors, no servants, no sign of anyone else living there. But in my uncle's study, I found a locked drawer in his desk. I pried it open with a screwdriver and discovered an old cassette recorder and a stack of tapes labeled by date. The first tape was from 12 years ago. My uncle's voice came through the static, calm and deliberate. He spoke like a man, leaving clues for someone he didn't trust. "If you're hearing this," he said, "you're my blood. That means you carry the same curse I did. Wealth without purpose is a slow death. So I left you this place not to inherit, but to understand. The cameras are there for your protection, but you'll need to earn the key." The tape clicked off. I rewound it 3 times, listening for something more. But the words didn't change. That night, the lights flickered again. This time, when I looked toward the study, the drawer I'd forced open was closed. And someone had placed the tape recorder back on the desk, rewound to the beginning. I didn't touch the recorder again for 2 days. I couldn't. It felt like it was watching me, like the whole house was waiting for me to make the next move. I tried to keep busy, cleaning, pacing, pretending to read. But every creak in the walls, every flicker of the lights felt deliberate. By the 3rd morning, I'd had enough. I went down to the lobby, determined to find the building manager. The front desk was empty. No security guards, no residents, no sound. The place felt deserted. Even the doors were locked from the inside. I couldn't get out. I took the elevator back up. As the doors opened, I froze. On the floor in front of my door was another note. This one wasn't typed or neat. It looked rushed, almost carved into the paper with a pen. It said, "The cameras aren't his. Someone else is watching." That night, I turned off every light in the penthouse and sat in the dark. I wanted to see what was real. Around midnight, I saw it, a red light blinking faintly through one of the vents. I climbed onto a chair, unscrewed the cover, and pulled out a small camera. It wasn't the same model as the others. It was newer, sleeker. Inside the vent, next to the camera, was a flash drive wrapped in electrical tape. I plugged it into the old computer in the study. There were video files, dozens of them. Each one was time-stamped. The first was dated 2 weeks before I'd arrived. It showed the penthouse, empty, until a man walked into frame. It wasn't my uncle. It was someone younger, wearing gloves, methodically installing new cameras around the apartment. In the corner of the footage, a second figure appeared, watching him. I couldn't see the face, only the reflection of a silver watch. When I checked the next file, my breath caught. It showed me, sleeping on the couch the first night I'd arrived. The angle was close. Too close. I looked around the study, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. But there was only silence, and my own reflection in the glass. That's when I noticed it. In the reflection of the window, behind me, a faint red light blinking from the ceiling. I turned around slowly. It was still blinking. I stared at that blinking red light for a long time, half convinced it was my imagination. Then, as if responding to my thoughts, it blinked faster. I climbed onto the desk and ripped the device out of the ceiling. It wasn't just a camera. It had a transmitter, something high-end, the kind you'd see in security agencies, not private homes. That was the moment I realized this wasn't some eccentric inheritance test. Someone was using my uncle's rules to trap me here. I wrapped the camera in a towel and shoved it into a drawer. Then I unplugged every electronic device in the apartment, lamps, clocks, even the microwave. For the first time since arriving, I felt like I was taking control. But that feeling didn't last. The next morning, the power was back on. Every device I'd unplugged was plugged in again. The tape recorder sat on the counter, turned on, the tape spinning slowly. My uncle's voice filled the air. "You can't run from the truth, Michael. Not in this house." I yanked the power cord from the wall, but the voice didn't stop. It kept playing, even though the recorder was unplugged. I threw it into the trash can, grabbed my coat, and headed for the elevator. The doors wouldn't open. I slammed the button again and again, but nothing happened. I took the stairs, descending all 40 floors, but when I reached the lobby, it was the same, silent, empty, sealed. No exit, no sound. The city outside the glass seemed distant, unreal, like I was staring at a photograph instead of a street. I went back upstairs, pacing the living room until I saw movement in the corner of my eye. The television turned itself on. The screen flickered to life, showing the security feed from inside the penthouse. Every camera, every angle, all showing me. Then the feed cut to black, replaced by text. "You're not the first to stay here." I froze. A door creaked open down the hall, slow and deliberate. I turned toward the sound, heart pounding. It was the locked room, the one I'd heard music coming from before. Only this time, the door was wide open, and the music was playing again. The music coming from that room was old, a soft crackle of a vinyl record, the kind my uncle might have listened to in the 70s. A slow jazz tune, almost gentle, almost mocking. I stood there for a long moment, hand hovering over the doorknob, wondering if I really wanted to see what was inside. Then I pushed it open. The room was dark except for a single lamp in the corner. On a small table beneath it sat a record player, spinning slowly. The record had no label, just a gold surface scratched from years of use. The air smelled like dust and old leather. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me. I froze, listening. The hum of the city outside disappeared. It felt like the walls swallowed every sound. Then I saw it. A small television set across the room, half hidden under a sheet. Its screen flickered to life on its own. The footage was grainy, black and white, but I recognized the place immediately. It was this same room. A man sat in the chair by the record player, facing the camera. My uncle. He looked older than in his photographs, thinner, his eyes hollow. He spoke slowly, like he was talking to someone he already knew. "If you've made it this far," he said, "you're starting to understand what this house is." He leaned closer to the camera. "This place doesn't just test you, Michael. It watches who you become when there's no one left to pretend for." He paused, almost smiling. "And you're not alone here." The screen cut to static. The music stopped. I turned toward the door, ready to leave, but it wouldn't open. I pulled harder. Nothing. Then, through the static of the television, I heard something new, a faint whisper, like a voice layered beneath the noise. It repeated the same words over and over, low and steady. Find the ledger. I backed away slowly. That's when I noticed a faint outline on the wall behind the record player, a rectangular shape beneath the wallpaper. I tore it open with my hands, the paper peeling like skin. Inside was a hidden compartment containing an old leather-bound book. The first page had a single entry written in my uncle's hand. Day 1. The deal begins. That's when I realized this wasn't just a test. It was a continuation. The ledger felt heavier than it should have. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed and warped from time. I carried it back to the study, sat at the desk, and opened it to the first full page. Each entry was written in the same sharp, deliberate handwriting. Day 1. The house has agreed to terms. I frowned. It didn't sound like a diary. It sounded like a contract. The next few pages were a strange mix of notes and observations. Dates, names, amounts of money. But every few entries, there were phrases that made no sense. Lines like, "The watchers approve," or "The cycle resets." One passage stopped me cold. Day 47. Subject 2 failed. The house consumed him. The cameras recorded everything. I flipped further ahead. The handwriting grew shakier, the tone more desperate. "I've seen them move when I'm not looking," one line read. "The rooms rearrange themselves. There's something alive in the walls." The final entry was short, just 9 words. The next heir must finish what I couldn't. I sat there for a long time, the pages trembling in my hands. Whatever my uncle had done here, it wasn't about wealth. It was something darker, something he'd willingly stepped into. I looked around the study. The air felt heavy, electric. The lights flickered once, then steadied. I thought about the cameras, the notes, the locked doors. Everything led back to this ledger. I decided to test something. I tore out one of the blank pages and placed it on the desk. Then I picked up a pen. "The house has agreed to terms," I wrote, half mocking the tone of the first entry. The moment the pen left the page, a chill ran down my spine. Every light in the penthouse went out at once. I froze, listening. The silence was absolute. Then, slowly, the faint sound of that same jazz tune drifted down the hallway. I stood up, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone flashlight. When I turned toward the window, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Across the street, in the building opposite mine, a light had turned on. And through the glass, I saw a figure standing there, motionless, watching me. It was wearing my uncle's suit. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The figure across the street didn't move. It stood there, perfectly still, its outline sharp against the dim light of the opposite building. The suit, the posture, even the height, it was him. My uncle. But that was impossible. He'd been dead for years. I blinked, and the light went out. The window went dark. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The penthouse seemed to close in around me, the air thick with static. I grabbed the ledger from the desk and clutched it tight, half expecting it to burn in my hands. When I looked down at the page I'd written on, the words had changed. "Welcome to day 1. I dropped it. That's when the house came alive. Every screen in the apartment lit up at once. Television, computer, even the dark glass of the oven door. My reflection stared back at me from every surface, multiplied 100 times. Then the images began to shift. Each reflection twisted slightly out of sync, lagging behind my movements. It wasn't just me anymore. One of the reflections smiled. I turned toward the nearest screen, but before I could react, the lights flickered and the power died again. Only the faint red blink of the camera in the corner remained. I reached for the phone on the counter, dead. The landline, silent. Every exit I'd tried before was sealed again. I felt like a rat trapped in a maze someone else had built decades ago. And then, over the hum of the city outside, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. They were coming from the hallway that led to the locked room. I moved toward the sound, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The music started again, louder this time. The same jazz tune, skipping every few seconds, the record damaged. I reached the door. It was open just a crack. I pushed it wider. The chair by the record player was no longer empty. A man sat in it, back to me, head slightly tilted. The same gray suit. The same posture from the photograph in the hallway. He spoke without turning. His voice was low, familiar. 30 days, Michael. You're almost done. When he finally turned his head toward me, his face wasn't my uncle's anymore. It was mine. For a moment, I couldn't move. The man in the chair, no, the thing wearing my face, just stared back at me. Same eyes, same jawline, same scar on the chin I'd gotten when I was 10. It smiled slowly, like it had been waiting for me to understand. My voice came out broken, barely a whisper. What are you? It didn't answer. It just pointed toward the ledger still clutched in my hand. The air around us felt thick, vibrating, like the room itself was breathing. The record player skipped again, repeating the same 3 notes over and over until it warped into static. Then the reflection spoke in my voice, calm and precise. He finished his 30 days. Now it's your turn. Before I could react, the lights in the room flared so bright it felt like my skin was burning. I shielded my eyes, but when the light dimmed, the chair was empty. Only the record player remained, spinning in silence. I stumbled backward, gasping, and the ledger slipped from my hand. When it hit the floor, it fell open to the very last page, one I hadn't seen before. The ink was fresh, still glistening under the lamplight. Day 30. Subject complete. Ownership transferred. My name was written beneath it. The floor trembled under my feet. The walls began to pulse like veins, faintly glowing with the same red hue as the cameras. The hum grew louder, deeper, until I realized it wasn't mechanical, it was a heartbeat. The entire house was alive, feeding off me, claiming me. I ran to the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The room was closing in, the air tightening like a noose. I pressed my hands to the wall, but it felt warm, like skin. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting in the chair by the record player. The house was silent. My reflection stared back from the dark television screen. Except it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was someone else watching me, standing where I had stood hours ago. He looked terrified, confused, just like I had been. Somewhere deep in the walls, the faint crackle of the record began to play again. And then I understood the truth my uncle had left behind. The condition wasn't to stay for 30 days. It was to take my place. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.